So I welcome all of you to our spiritual meeting for April 2024. And thank you to all of you for joining. So the topic today is World Karma. So that's an interesting topic. Let's look at it from few perspectives. You see, now, one thing is there that look, we have this world of space, time, and images, what we call as conceptual reality, or a temporary reality, or you call as changing reality. But you see now, you see to maintain a law and order in this entire space of uh, space, time, images, events, activity. So it has got certain laws, and one of the laws is this universal law of karma, right? Now, this universal law of karma, you see, neither does it do any good to anyone, or nor is it really doing bad to anyone. What we have got to realize is that it maintains a law and order and balances the normal continuation of the events and life at different levels in this space-time manifestation. And of course, it's just not just working automatically. The universal law of karma is basically governed by a spiritual hierarchy, and John will go more deeper into that. So now coming down from the universal law of karma, you see, just like, a good example coming to my mind is that you have a tree and the tree has got these branches, and each branch is actually unique to itself, isn't it? Just inspect a tree and you will see that no two branches are actually similar in their appearance or shape. Each is sort of uniquely identified. So if we say that this universal law of karma is the main stem, then there are these different branches of different types of karma. And actually, we can say that the roots which are nurturing, this world of space and images, which are nurturing even this tree of karma, is basically world karma. But let's start with the branches. So if you look at a leaf, so I say that the leaf say represents an individual human being. So karma basically is nothing else but our deeds, the activities, the functions that we undertake, which keep on actually accumulating, and then they determine, what our next life is going to be, what our previous life was, and so on. So that is personal karma, right? But now you look at it. Let's look at the family structure here on Earth. So basically, when you look at a family, the husband, the wife, and the children combined, that basically constitutes family karma. Because you see, it will depend upon the ethical, moral, physical activities of the husband, the wife, and their impact on the children, which will determine the direction which the family takes. If they undertake uh, unfruitful or poisonous activities, that will then flow into the family. One could be actually a drunk, could be a drinking drunkard, or doing misdeeds, or not wanting to work, just that one is lazy. But then on the other hand, the parents could be very hardworking, very ethical, and that naturally impacts on the children. So that is the family karma, right? But you see, now you got to look at one thing, as we had discussed in a previous satsang. Rishi Master Byansa Duno had said that the total number of human souls is 60 billion in number. So 60 billion
किसने
means
रखा है
1 billion multiplied by a thousand
बोल रहा है
million.
ना
That makes it 60,000 million human souls, right? So that's quite a big number. On Earth at the moment, there are roughly about 7.5 billion or maybe a bit more of these human souls. Now you see the thread actually, the network which actually keeps everything together, all the images together, of course, we know very well is the presence of consciousness. But then there is all this activity taking place, when we look at these human images or the human souls. So basically, you see, collective karma is this. And let me go back, let me go one step back actually. So, we were talking about family karma. So from family karma, then basically when you expand it, it comes to the national karma. So national karma is the collective karma of that country, right? Depending upon how the collective karma of the individuals of that country is, that country actually progresses. Some countries are totally at war. Some countries are actually really progressing. Some countries are in complete poverty. But that is naturally a result, mainly, you see, related to the total collective national karma of the human beings that occupy that particular country. So now expanding beyond that, coming back to this is when you look at this world, not only at the 7.5 billion human souls, but if you look at the 60 billion souls which are at different levels, in this hierarchy, in different planes, in this so-called our solar system, right? We don't know about the other solar systems. We're just talking about our solar system. So you see, the blueprint of evolution, though it is predetermined and takes its course, but it is also very highly determined by the collective karma of the human beings. So that is basically where we have got to realize that it is actually one big human family. And if one person becomes a sage or becomes illuminated, it doesn't mean actually that it is even freedom for that individual or it is freedom for that entire human race, because collectively we have to work hand in hand until everyone has reached that level of Buddha, or what we call as Ramana Maharishi. And the outstanding example of this lies in that even though these people were completely illuminated, still you had Gautam Buddha, Ramakrishna, Yog Vashisht, Ramana Maharishi come back in human form. What for? They had no need actually to come. They were fully illuminated. But the very purpose of coming back to earth and undergoing even suffering with their human body is to help others to raise them. So basically, that actually brings us to the importance of world karma. And I think I've said enough. So I'll ask John now. I'll ask John to take over. John, would you like to please continue?
Well, thank you everyone for coming to listen to me. I hope I'm going to make sense. It's going to be a little bit difficult because it's not going to be straightforward because I'm going to be talking about spiritual beings. So what I'd like to do is to share a screen first off to begin with. And this will be this screen. Can everybody see this screen at the moment?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Now, I'm going to talk to this because it's better than just looking at me, and at least you can read this. And we've got an interesting thing in terms of the world of self and dualism. And the way I sort of see it is dualism is a characteristic property of self. And human beings seemingly exist in dualism or Maya. And why I say seemingly, because it is Maya in reality. But behind our visible world is what we call an invisible spiritual world with its various beings, which also include those human beings who have passed away and are preparing for their next incarnation. Now, Anil mentions his spiritual guides, the Rishi, as Beniswa Junov, and the Ramana, who were both on Earth. And they come from these invisible planes. And sometimes a few people are able to enter these planes and communicate with these planes. So we live in the spiritual beings. And how do we live in those spiritual beings? Through these beings permeating us. Now that's interesting because we sort of feel, hey, that's just me. I've got my liver, I've got my stomach, I've got my organs, I've got my brain. Where are these beings? And this is where they're hidden from us because they manifest as forces of our own physical body, our own emotional body, right through us. So this spiritual world is a higher reality, yet it has still aspects of dualism in it. And so, but only on this physical plane can we evolve, change, and become more perfect, whereby we can eventually become conscious of both worlds while still living in a physical body. And that's important because in this invisible world where we go after death, there is no possibility of free change. If we've done something, we've got to live with it. If we've become imperfect, we've got to live with this. So I see this could be regarded as a journey towards self. Now, what I'd like to do is just sort of share a little bit of this invisible plane in a diagrammatic form. So I'm going to do a new share, and it's going to be a description of those spiritual beings. And this is just a diagram of this. And okay, now, if you can see right above, right on the top, I've written self or Brahman. Almost it's impossible to get an idea of this. We can only sort of infer it and look up to this self or Brahman, and it exists, you could say, beyond human comprehension. But if you notice down below here, or on the side, I've got two arrows, one going up from humanity and the other one coming down. In other words, self is within us and we're within self. So it's an interesting concept. I'd like to start off with what we call the Godhead or Trinity. And in the Hindu religion, it's been known as Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. You can talk about in the Christian religion as Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You can also talk about other trinities, Father, Mother, Son, etc. So I just put this as a triangle. Again, this is almost beyond our comprehension. And when we come down to these beings called the seraphim, and I wanted to just touch on these beings. If you can imagine these beings, which are also known as spirits of love, if you can imagine them moving star systems, that their forces are so mighty that they're able to coordinate the position of the stars, the various solar systems. This is how mighty they are. And yet it's hard to comprehend this, but with these beings are the ones who implement earthly karma. Now, I'm just going to go down a little bit here. We've got humanity here. Now, we can sort of talk about humanity, humanity doing all sorts of deeds, if you want to put it this way. Now, these deeds are then read, well, in our thinking, the angels read our deeds. They're called the sons of life. Now, these are terms. In the Hindu philosophy, you'll have different words for these. You'll be calling them devas, pitris, different names for these beings, but they have the same functionality in many of the philosophies. There might be overlaps. There might be two or three beings represented by one being. But I just wanted to give you a little taste of this. The angel works in our thinking. The archangel works in our feeling. Now, the archangel's 2 steps above human beings. So it works in groups. It works in nations. Now, the archai works worldwide. They're 3 steps above, but they work in our will. So we have these 3 beings working in ourselves, reaping our deeds, and then bringing these deeds to life. And once they've brought these to life, they then send them up higher to other beings. And again, these are just names: spirits of form, spirits of movement, spirits of wisdom. These now bring our deeds, which have been brought to life as living deeds, they now put being into it. And these are then sent up to these other three levels of beings, and they then are able to create the physical circumstances for our karma, whether it be world karma, group karma, or individual karma. So just go down to the idea of the thrones, just the name of it, spirits of will. Now, these could be said to be the creator of physical substance. So everything around you, which you see at the moment, of physicality that you touch, the essence of this has been given as a gift by these beings. So this is how mighty they are. I can only talk in concepts. Is that a question? Sorry. Yeah.
No, just continue, John.
Yeah, okay. And so these cherubim, these are the forces of the zodiac. So whenever you do the star signs, of a person, all the forces that come down from the cherubim actually form these forces together with the planetary beings and then create the star system, or astrology, as one would say. And as I said, these beings are above the cherubim and the thrones. But how is this related to self? Well, if I go a little bit further to this Trinity, all these beings, right down to the angel, you could say a part of this Godhead. What I'm saying is they're instruments. So whenever this Godhead or something, I'll put it in earthly terms because it's only anthropomorphic that I can explain it. Whenever this, say, has an idea, the idea gets translated all the way down to the angel. And there are further beings, of course. For those of you who understand that there are elemental beings, right down below the humanity, etc. But this gets translated right down as a kind of a oneness. So you can say that all these beings are in not direct presence, but in the presence of this being. Again, going up higher, we then have self or Brahman, which permeates everything, including ourselves. But that's for a higher development, of course. So now I'm just going to go back. I hope that sort of makes sense. Write down your questions about these beings, and I can come back later to explain this a little bit further. But you can see it's complex. And if you really want to, you could get the Hindu terms, you could get the Muslim terms, you can get the ancient Greek terms, etc., fitting into these names, if you want to put it this way. But the names are, initially this was developed out of the Christian Greco-Greek mythologies. And so we're just using those terms for today. So I'm just going to put it back to the world karma. Okay. So as you can see, all this is regarded that we're progressing upwards as a journey towards self. So now I'm going to go into the specifics of karma. Anil talked about individual karma, group karma, and world karma. So I'm going to try and focus on world karma. Now this occurs whereby large segments of humanity share a common experience due to new physical and spiritual and social environments. Now, we as human beings have got no choice to be born into these situations. Now, it arises through causes of actions by spiritual beings. As I said, when we look up to the seraphim, we see that they may introduce new things into human evolution, as one would say. And this can also happen with human beings. We can do certain actions, which then are sent up to these higher beings, and they come down a few years later, decades later. And these actions, as Anil was saying, they can be both progressive and detrimental. They're not evil in themselves. They're just an effect of previous actions.
No, slow motion.
So
Just continue. I think there's just a disturbance. Can you
Yeah.
please put the audio on mute?
So today, humanity plays a greater role in the formation of world karma. Now, previous to that, we didn't really play much of a role. We did, but it was an unconscious role. It was really a role of spiritual beings creating it for us. Even though human beings acted out of the role, it wasn't conscious on their part. They just acted out, received an impulse, go to war with this person or this nation, create this artwork, create this religion, create this spiritual stream, and it was done. But the spiritual beings, those beings that I showed in the previous diagram, initiated these actions. But now we have a choice. Free conscious human actions are necessary to create the future incarnation of the earth after the earth has passed away. And this new incarnation is going to be called the new Jupiter stage. So that's a great responsibility that we have now. The choice has been given to us to create future world karma. That's an incredible responsibility. In other words, we can actually stop evolution. We can stop our journey towards self through our egotism, whatever we may call it, lust for power, etc. So let's have a look at some examples of world karma. So as you know today, and we actually look at what we're using at the moment, we're using Zoom. It's part of materialism. But isn't it wonderful? We are able to communicate with people at a distance, with people from all over the world. It's wonderful from one aspect. But we can't avoid being propelled into materialism and intellectualism. But this process began around the 15th century. And I'd say within 100 years, there will be not one place on earth where anyone can escape materialism's influence. And hence, every person incarnating will have as part of their own individual experience the world karma of materialism and intellectualism to deal with. And I think that's almost happened. It's all over the world, where most countries have now become modernized, or we could say materialized, if you want to put it that way, because it can be a negative experience as well. It could actually destroy a lot of the old traditions of what's happened before. So that's one aspect of world karma where everybody, you and I, are sharing this. But let's go back to the past. We can go back to what was called as the Golden Age. So we were as though we were embedded in the divine, just like embryos in our mother's wombs. We were spiritually in the bosom of God, if we could say. We could say the golden age of the Hindus or paradise of the Christian. And all of us present today shared in that experience. But in the middle of the Atlantean period, due to world karma, for the first time, human beings experienced themselves as individuals. And they could say I to themselves. Now, this didn't happen all at once. It happened, but it happened quickly, that most individuals now became aware of themselves, awoke as though from a dream, and could say, I am. Some say this is bad, but they only say this is bad because they've already got it and worked through it and can work past it. Because it can be egotistical, very egotistical. But that's world karma. That was necessary. It's as though we were a higher animal living in these beautiful spiritual experiences, and finally we could become individuals. And we're still becoming individuals, by the way, because you can still notice people are still living in that older consciousness. We might call it tribal consciousness, where the group is far more important than the individual. They're still individuals. They can say I to themselves, but they're coming out of it where they're saying I. And what we're also saying to ourselves, I'm aware of myself and I can care for you being another person. That wasn't there before. We now can actually look beyond ourselves. Now, this is something that's probably difficult to bear for us males, because generally speaking, the karma of being a male, so all you males out there, this karma is to be a woman in the next incarnation, and vice versa. Now, there are always exceptions to this rule. So a soul can be reborn under certain conditions in consecutive male incarnations. But generally speaking, the karma of a woman is to be a male in the next incarnation. The karma of a male is to be a female in the next incarnation. So, yeah, so if we're treating, if we as males are mistreating females, we may be on the other end in the next life. So we've got to be nice to our fellow female companions. Now, another thing of world karma, and we look how it works through individuals. You probably may be aware that Galileo discovered the telescope, and that changed astronomy. It changed us looking into the heavens. Before, it was kind of only being able to observe the night sky, the movements of the planets, what we could be viewed through eyesight. But now we could go see right into the distant galaxies, etc. And this was discovered by Galileo from children by chance playing with lenses and putting them in the right position, and Galileo was actually able to peer through it, and it was a moment of saying, yes, this is something new. But this was actually arranged by the spiritual world for this to happen at that time. So sometimes things are arranged at certain times. It's not always perfect, by the way, and humanity could then use the telescope for consequent scientific discoveries. And what we find is that I'm talking about Western or Europe. They had this Ptolemaic system where the Earth was the center of the universe. And due to the telescope and other sort of observations, all of a sudden it was not the center. Human beings were not the center. So something happened. So something happened to the thought of human beings. So that's a discovery. And here we've got the next thing is an interesting one. Now, if you have a disease or a sickness, you've got karma that you're going through, generally speaking. Look, I've probably got to add, karma, all events are not karmic. There can be accidents. So we can't say, oh, that's due to your karma that you've had that misfortune. You may have a misfortune, and it may be totally new karma as an accident, because even though we've got these mighty beings ordering these millions of events, sometimes they can't do all of them at once, and sometimes someone gets caught into an accidental sort of karmic situations. So there are accidents. So that's what I wanted to say. So it's very important not to judge an individual that's karmic and that's not karmic. We don't know. Until you're clairvoyant, until you're able to see the karma of another person, it's better to sort of leave off any judgment from anyone, and to help that person out as much as possible, because we don't know what the situation is with that spiritually. Now we're coming back to modern cures or the prevention of diseases. A lot of these are karmic, but many of these diseases, through immunization, have been eliminated, basically. And this is world karma. But there are other means which will be employed to bring about karmic compensation. So Rudolf Steiner gives an example about smallpox. He said, because that happened a few years before his time, the smallpox vaccines started to appear and other vaccines started to appear. So he was able to say that, look, smallpox is basically being not totally cured, but cured in his day. And that's and smallpox, which is a karmic consequence of a lack of charity, has been eliminated. So how else is a lack of charity towards others going to come about? Karma does not go away. It will come in other forms. And you might have noticed mental illnesses are increasing lately and other sorts of mental issues. Now that is because, say, like the modern medicinal practices, they've enhanced our lives. Fantastic. I'll go for them. But if you want to get your karma sorted out quickly, go through the disease without taking any medicines. And I wouldn't recommend that. I'm the first one to be a sook and take the medicines, but I realize I've got to do spiritual work to work out that karma that I would have had. So for instance, I've got a couple of stents in my heart, and maybe I would say I am alive due to modern medicines. I haven't died of a heart attack. I am reasonably fit and I've got a reasonably productive life. But unless I work on the spiritual component, which I can do now, I couldn't do in the past, so disease was a good way of working through karma. Now I can work consciously to work off my karma. So the much external suffering from disease has been reduced when we compare that to previous ages. However, the inner suffering has replaced the outer suffering. And today, we can actually say the inner suffering is more difficult to bear than was previously the case. So the increase of mental illness has replaced many external diseases. And let's look at COVID. Look what it did to the world. COVID was a disease that wasn't readily cured instantly. So there were many consequences to COVID, much suffering due to lockdowns, and there were a fair few deaths due to COVID. Now that's all due to you could say much of that was due to karmic compensation, individual karma, but COVID itself could be considered a world karmic event. And look what happened, all the social disharmony that occurred due to COVID. So that's a part of world karma which we have to deal with. Now, part of world karma, if you know how world evolution is going to increase, our outer circumstances may become easier, but our inner circumstances and dealing with people, dealing with jobs, it's going to become a lot harder. Our social conditions are going to become much harder. But we've been given this ability through thinking and consciousness to also rise to the occasion. But one of the things of the modern medicinal practices is that we've had the rise of mental illness due to karma finding other ways of being expressed. And unfortunately, for those of you who are not in Australia, we had about 5 deaths in Sydney due to someone with mental illness who stabbed many people in a shopping centre, and 5 of those people died. Now, maybe this is the beginning of it, and I can see there's more mental illness occurring on the horizon. And now we have to work spiritually with these people. How are we going to work with this situation? And there aren't many families who are spared now with members of family having some form of mental illness that we have to deal with. So this, I feel, is on the rise. I know some people have said, oh yeah, we've never measured it before, but it's just a feeling that the mental illnesses are actually on the increase, and that is world karma. And inwardly, we, those who are conscious enough through inner practices, can actually help this world situation that's been put in front of us. In other words, we shouldn't run away from it. We should make every effort to work with our new social conditions, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Now, let's have a look at individual logical thinking. Now, this arose about the 6th to the 3rd century BC and culminated in Aristotle, where it reached a peak. Now, there hasn't been anyone close to Aristotle who was able to express thinking in the way that he did at that time. And from the little Greek civilization of about 300,000 people, that culture spread throughout the world, and much of what we have as thinking arose with Aristotle. Now, what was before that? If you go before that, there were religious texts inspired from the divine. The people who wrote down those texts never said that it was from themselves. It was from that hierarchy, or from great masters from the spiritual world, which flowed into them and flowed out onto paper or spoke out to the people. So if we go back to 6,000 or 7,000 years BC and we go to the ancient rishis, and where the echoes, the first great Vedas were spoken, and what was written down was only a part of what was spoken through them. Most of what came about was from these higher spiritual beings, and they were vessels that they could speak out to the people. And this was carried verbally and from memory for thousands of years into the ancient Indian civilization and to the present civilization at the moment when it was written down. What is it? Less than 2,000 years ago. But it was not individual logical thinking. Now, let's go to the war in Russia and Ukraine. Anil talked about group karma or national karma. Well, we've got the war in Palestine with the Israelis. We've got the Rwanda and the Cambodia's genocides. I don't know if you remember them. In Cambodia, there was a couple of million people that were just slaughtered. In Rwanda, there was 1 million people. And the war in Russia and Ukraine, I'd like to sort of focus a little bit on that. Now, you might say that's a group karma between Russia and the Ukrainian people. But when you actually look at it, karma's intertwined. We've had 70 good years of materialism where we've forgotten those spiritual beings, which I sort of drew, just a diagram of. And these are mighty spiritual beings, but they need our prayers and our thoughts and our meditative life. And we could say in the religions, there were sacrifices, incense, and thoughts were sent up. This is reduced. So somewhere there's a weak spot in the world. So what I'm talking, there's a weak spot in the spiritual fabric of those people. And then it breaks out. It can break out from, in this case here, it's, Putin had reasons for, had his reasons for attacking Ukraine. And at the moment, you probably realize there's a strange thing going on. There's about 4,000 or 5,000 people dying every week in Russia, Ukraine. And the war in Palestine, there's about 30 or 40 people dying, and that receives incredible publicity versus the 4,000 or 5,000. It's a strange thing. But what this war in Russia, young men are dying prematurely. Now, it sounds almost cruel, but I spoke about the two-way communications. They're unconscious. Upwards, they're conscious through those spiritual beings. Into human beings, they're unconscious. But what happens is those spiritual beings need our thoughts, our reverence, our prayers, whatever we do, to be sent up to them and we could talk about as sacrifice, the sacrificial smoke sent up to the spiritual world. There's a real symbology of incense, lighting of incense and giving sacrifice to the spiritual beings. What it means is our feelings, our thoughts, our deeds, they're like, I've got to use a very crude expression, they're like food for human beings. Now, the human being's central to all those beings, and I won't say how or why because it's difficult, but we're the centerpiece. in the physical body, in the etheric body, in the astral body, and they're supporting us. Now, is anyone here know what goes on in your digestion? Are you able to get the chemicals in, burn the foods, send them in? We're not able to do any of this. It's totally unconscious. Are you conscious when you move your arm? No, this is being done for us by all these beings working in unison to make us human beings. So what happens when you starve? Are you able to do the same work that you did before? No. What happens is you're not able to feed the good forces in to those human beings. So there's a weak spot on the earth. And I'm not saying, Russia or Ukraine are to blame for it. I'm just saying they're the weakest spot where the aminosity was the highest. And so those young deaths, unfortunately, the unused forces are able to, you might say, fill those spiritual beings so they can send their benevolent forces down to help us again. The war in Palestine, it's interesting as well. It just blows up. And if anyone knows history of Rwanda and Cambodia, that just happened out of the blue. Now, this is all a working of world karma, weaknesses in the earth, somewhere around the world. Where there's strength, you might say the materialism of America, like part of America or Australia, or, where India's materialistic, that caused, you could say, had an effect on Russia and Ukraine to actually start the war. And how does it start? It starts through impulses in human beings. Human beings get ideas, wrong or right, they get feelings. So in Russia at the moment, there is a strong feeling of folk soul, strong feeling of the Russian greatness. And unfortunately, if it oversteps the mark, then you have war. And the same thing with war in Palestine, etc. So I'm not saying the rights or wrongs of the situations. I'm just trying to explain where group karma fits in. Now, we come to the next part. And this is a real benefit. We are actually the rise of social media. Now, that sounds great. Here we are. You're able to listen to me. You're able to share my thoughts from all over the world, you may be, and vice versa. When we have the discussion, we're able to discuss with people from all over the world of like mind or different minds and being able to share different ideas. But what's happened with social media? And I'll say this also happened with COVID, the diminishing of sound, thinking, and truth. And we have social media. I don't know if you've noticed it, but as part of world karma, if we don't develop our thinking, it will be taken away from us, and we will be led as human beings into a not so pleasant state. So it's very important to keep your thinking going, keep working on it, because here on earth is the only place you're going to develop and change yourself. And thinking is very important as part of it. I'm talking about sound, logical thinking and truth. And so what happens with social media addictions? Now, maybe what happens is people will listen and they want authority figures to tell them what to do. Those days are gone. That's part of world karma. Those beings who I showed you the picture of have said, human beings, you're now free enough to take responsibility. We're not going to tell you what to do anymore. You yourselves have got to work it out through sound thinking and feeling, and a sound feeling for truth. But with the rise of social media, it's had the effect of diminishing sound thinking, and it's going to get worse. And we're going to have to deal with more silly situations than we've had to in the past. Now, so my question is, Rudolf Steiner talks about World War I as being caused by the materialism of the decades before World War I. So what will the materialism since World War II bring us today and tomorrow? Now, when we actually look at our lives, they've gotten better. The conditions, the houses, the health, the longevity. So this karma, this world karma, is really building up to a peak. So unless we're able to steer it in a certain direction, you might see things that you might be unhappy with tomorrow. I'm not saying when, I'm not going to predict it. People can be doomsdayers all the time, but this world karma is there. The spiritual beings close to us have been forgotten by many people because we're enjoying the good life and no longer care about the world around us. So I'm putting this as a question. And have you noticed with your companions? Now, I'm getting a bit old in the tooth, and I can remember the days where you would go around and there was a thirst for spiritual knowledge. And nowadays, with materialism, I'm finding it harder to work with younger people. What I mean harder, it's up to me. That's my karma, that I've got to be able to meet younger people with spiritual knowledge from where they're coming from, not from where I'm coming from. And that's hard because I'd like to give them what I know, but that's not what's required. So there's a diminishing natural thirst for spiritual knowledge due to materialism. So this now needs individual insight and effort. And the religions of the past, they were great. And if you are able to work with religion, fantastic. But this is diminishing. And the more you live in a Western type situation, the more it diminishes. And that's part of world karma. And why is that part of world karma? It's for us to make the effort so that we can develop ourselves out of our own initiative. Nobody's going to do it before us. Before we had teachers, we had ashrams, we had monasteries where we could go to, we could be given instructions, and there it was. Something happened, and it worked. So another thing of world karma, and these are all tied in, by the way. You can't take one out with the other. It's sort of all tied into a wholeness. So we've got individual freedom, but with individual freedom, to gain that, we need individual thinking, individual morality, and we need to work on our egotism. But individual freedom has arisen, but there's a negative consequence of this, the increase of egotism and material egotism. So if we want to use this individual freedom, we need to work on ourselves. Again, it comes back to us as individuals. Now, this is an interesting one. And this is something, what the Buddha brought as a spiritual teacher, he brought the teaching of love, compassion and love for human beings. Now, if you go back into the records as best you can, there was only duty, what the priest said, how you were to behave. Because before the Buddha, there was no teaching for compassion and love. Sure, you loved the people of your tribe, you loved, but equally well, you felt anyone outside the tribe or your family as no one. They didn't. But at the moment, we have this individual capacity for love, which came about after Buddha. And it wasn't caused by Buddha. Rudolf Steiner talks about that the being called Jesus Christ was the one who brought this capacity for love. Buddha taught the capacity for love. And the way I've interpreted this, and this is hard, when I talk about love, can I love you? You know what? I can love a female, but then that love was around before. That was for thousands of years. That was a karmic bond. Can I love a female? Can we love each other as male and female? Can I love my family? Yeah, but that's a blood bond. But what about a total stranger, especially if we disagree? How many of you take an interest in someone who you really don't like? That's the real thing. So if you take an interest, where are you coming from so that I can understand you? And that to me is love of another person, especially if you don't like them. And especially if you hate the person, if that person's a nasty person, can you take an interest in it? Now, it doesn't mean the soppy love, but this is something new in humanity. But it really requires a strengthened I in the physical body. You've got to be strong to be able to overcome the hatred, because, the hatred due to perhaps a wrong the person has done. And you've got to, so that's a new capacity, and we've got the new capacity for individual freedom, but we're just at the beginning. So this is, again, worldwide karma. And the other interesting thing is, and here we have worldwide universality of spiritual knowledge, which is no longer tied to a particular people. And you as an audience at the moment, this is exactly, we come from different streams and we're sharing each other's ideas from different directions. We don't have to agree with each other because we've got the freedom, but we use our thinking. So worldwide spirituality is something new. Before, religion or spirituality was tied to particular groups, but now it's universal, and we've got to understand it. We can no longer have a national religion. It needs to be a worldwide spiritual movement of sorts, which allows us to be free. And I think this is the trend. You may disagree with me, but this is something new that wasn't there, but it couldn't have happened before, because before there was too much group egotism to prevent it. And coming down to it, as I said, it's tied up. Now, the blood or national bonds are today becoming destructive, and I mentioned Ukraine and Russia, of course. Now, in the past, these were absolutely necessary. So something in the past was good, now they become destructive. And Ukraine and Russia are real example of this. So this also says is we've got to work from what's in front of us today, not what was there yesterday. So 2,000 years ago, national bonds were totally acceptable and absolutely necessary for the human beings in that group to evolve and bring something new to the world. And that was okay. It's not okay today. Okay, I talked about World War I previously. So it's now necessary to understand how humanity must gradually prepare a different karma for the future of the world. Otherwise, untold suffering will arise. And that means we now need to make ourselves conscious of this, and we will make ourselves conscious only by understanding and taking consciously what we feel is right. If you tell me that's right and I disagree with it, I won't take it on. And this is the advantage of having our materialistic lifestyle of separation. We're no longer told what we do, but we need to consciously participate with each other in this forward journey. So this journey of perfection is assisted through world karma, and the conditions are provided for human beings to perfect themselves. But now we have the choice, because we need to work consciously and participate in this. So initially, through our understanding of world karma, through spiritual streams, if you look at Anil's books, Life, Journey to Self, and Life Beyond Death, the number of books that he's written, that's a start. We can actually gain knowledge of that. Beniswa Junov has certain works. Rudolf Steiner has certain works. This is to get a whole picture, because if we take only one side of it, we could be comfortable in ourselves, but we may not be doing everything we can do. So thank you, everyone, and I'll stop the sharing now, and I can take questions.
Thank you very much. That was very deep, actually, and gave a real picture of world karma. We don't have Vijayji for the conclusion, but basically, you see, the more that you work with yourself, the more you go towards that ever-present changeless reality, the more actually your outlook will actually broaden, and you will naturally actually participate in harmony with all images, with all human beings, and really participate in world karma, because you have attained freedom, you see, from images. Thank you very much, John, for a very beautiful and very deep lecture.